I'm really excited to have you all here today for the first episode in our series, Talent First Tuesdays, focused on breaking down barriers for underrepresented workers across North Carolina and how we can better connect them to good jobs. That was the focus of our recent Emerging Issues Forum that we held in February, Talent First Economics, where we had nearly 500 leaders from across the state who heard from thought leaders, practitioners, and each other about the best way forward to help make those connections and break down some of those barriers. We had some fantastic breakout sessions at the forum where participants were able to discuss and refine a set of recommendations and tactics that a task force had put together this fall. And they were able to learn from those with systems level expertise in workforce and others, as well as those with lived experience on how those recommendations were shaped and what it could mean in communities across the state. Not everyone was able to attend all of the forum breakout sessions that wanted to, and the word spread about them. And so because of that overwhelming interest, not only among those who were at the forum, who wish they could have attended more than one, but for those who were unable to join us, we wanted to bring this series to you so that you all can hear and participate and learn as well. So we brought back some of our speakers to provide high-level data and discuss the recommendations and tactics that could help support the connection of justice-involved individuals to good jobs. And that is the qualifier here, to good jobs. And then we'll stop recording after we have a chance to talk about those and use our remaining time to share our collective ideas for how these recommendations could come to life in your community and regions. Before we begin, I do want to provide some background about how the recommendations and tactics came to be. So first, I want to thank the U.S. Economic Development Administration, who was a primary supporter of this task force. It was co-chaired by Annie Izod, Executive Director of the NC Works Commission at NC Commerce, someone with very deep workforce systems expertise, as well as my friend, Philip Cooper, who is IEI's practitioner in residence this year, but also serves as a workforce equity advocate with the Land of Sky Regional Council in Western North Carolina. We had a total of 65 task force members from across the state, and they all participated or were a part of 5 different working groups of workers who are facing some of those barriers. And so our series will actually focus on those with disabilities and neurodiversity as one group, transitioning military and their families, opportunity youth, so those that are 16 to 24 age group, not in school and not in a job, those with a disability or neurodiversity. And then today's focus is on justice involved. That task force met 4 times over the fall to come up with a set of challenges, recommendations, and tactics to address those. And then we were able to highlight all of those at the Emerging Issues Forum in February. There were some cross-cutting themes that I want to kind of kick us off and make sure that we all have in mind before we go and dive into some of those very specific recommendations and some data. So the first one is that across all of our different working groups, all really felt that we need more resources that are accessible and relevant to the populations and individuals that they are trying to serve. That we need comprehensive career pathways that meet the needs of businesses and those underrepresented groups, because we know that there's a need and connections, but just really making sure that those career pathways are comprehensive. Revising our job postings to ensure that we're reaching a greater applicant pool, really by doing this by emphasizing the skills that are actually needed and ensuring that they're easy applications to review and complete. We need to invest in the workforce behind the workforce. This came up over and over again, that in order for us to go to work, it really takes a team. It takes healthcare providers and childcare providers and a sound education system for our children and so much more. So really thinking about that workforce behind the workforce. We could benefit by creating new funding models that make it easier for service providers to meet the unique needs of underrepresented populations. So thinking about how we support those boots on the ground nonprofits that are working directly, how we can take, how intermediary organizations like IEI and others can sort of braid different funding streams before it gets to the community to make it really much easier to oversee and implement their programs. Another one, creating opportunities for peer learning among employers, workforce developers, and service providers. Not everyone needs to go this alone, and there's a lot of lessons learned that can be brought and shared so folks aren't reinventing the wheel. And then finally, co-locating those trusted service providers, those community health workers, those boots on the ground with workforce services. So by co-locating them, they're just more likely to be able to influence one another's work to better meet the needs of the underrepresented individuals. So again, these are some cross-cutting themes that you'll hear repeated, probably in some of the remarks throughout the day, but then also in all of the series. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, my good friend, Tom White, who has been with NC State for the last 15 years in the role as Economic Development Partnership. He, in that role, collaborates with economic developers, workforce development professionals, and community development leaders to help attract capital investment and community development capital investment and employment growth throughout North Carolina. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today and for introducing our distinguished guests.
Sarah, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege. I assure you, we're all so elated that you've been named the Executive Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues. You lead with vigor and energy, a very dynamic team. And you referenced good jobs. That was the founder of the Institute, Governor James P. Hunt Jr.'s mantra for 4 terms in office as our state leader, talking about how critically important it was to not only attract foreign direct investment, domestic investment, but especially good jobs at good wages, which really raises all boats. And that's going to be part of the topic today. And it was the prevailing topic because it's a ubiquitous concern. You hear it everywhere regarding the tight labor market. So it's essential. You just delineated the cross-cutting themes. We're going to get into that with this outstanding panel that we have. But that was the recurring refrain all day on February 13th for a really productive and stimulating full day of discussion about how we're going to tackle this labor market phenomenon. Leading off, and I'm going to introduce them in order. Andrew Berger-Gross is a senior economist with our North Carolina Department of Commerce, Labor and Economic Analysis Division. He did a great job back on February 13th. We're going to hear from him more. Philip Cooper, the aforementioned Philip Cooper, the practitioner in residence at IEI from out in Asheville, North Carolina, where he does a lot of great work with Nathan Ramsey and the Regional Council. So it's great to have him on board and leading the charge with Annie Izod, as you mentioned, co-chairing the task force. Jennifer Jackson, who's CEO of Arise Collective, was formerly the Interfaith Prison Ministry for Women. And last and certainly not least, Nathan Cartwright, the employment peer mentor at Meridian Behavioral Health Services. So the team did a great job in person on the 13th. We're going to kick off now with Andrew, and he's going to show us some data because it's very important that we're data driven in this analysis. So Andrew, take it away.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Sarah. It's a privilege to be here. Just share my slides. Can everybody see that all right? All right, excellent. So building on what Tom was saying, just to provide a little bit of economic context for our discussion. So a very rapidly growing economy over the last few years, combined with demographic headwinds, has left us with a very severe labor shortage in North Carolina and nationwide. So in our state, as of February 2023, we had fewer than 1 job seeker for every available job opening in the state. Easily the tightest labor market on record, possibly the tightest labor market ever, certainly within living history. And what tends to happen during tight labor markets or job seekers markets is that it tends to be easier for job seekers to find work. And this is also the case for folks getting out of our state prison system. In the most recent year, nearly half of folks getting out of prison in our state did obtain employment within a year after exiting prison, which is a good deal higher than the 30% of folks finding work during the depths of the Great Recession. However, a good economy isn't just some magic wand that we can wave to get rid of inequality in our society. Despite how strong the labor market is, folks getting out of prison still face tremendous disparities in the labor market. They are employed at much lower rates than the rest of the population, And for those who are lucky enough to find work, they're typically only earning around $7,000 or $8,000 a year, well less than the statewide median wage of $35,000, and certainly nothing even approaching a living wage, let alone even a poverty level wage. Now, of course, going to prison can be traumatizing. It can throw off somebody's career path. But when you look at employment and earnings, not only after prison, but also before folks go to prison, you see that they tended to be employed at very low rates, and they tended to have very low wage earnings even before entering prison. So when thinking about some of the barriers to gainful employment for justice-involved folks in our state, we got to think that some of the issues that they're facing coming out of prison are going to be similar to the issues that they faced going into prison before they went to prison. So let's unpack some of these barriers. Some of these barriers are perhaps at the individual level. When we have people coming out of our prison system, we see that they tend to have only around half the amount of formal work experience as the rest of the population. They tend to have only about half the rate of high school attainment as the rest of the population, and they tend to have only around a third or less of the college going rate as the rest of the population. So there might be some human capital based barriers to higher paying employment for folks getting out of prison. A lot of the barriers, however, are more intractable, more structural in nature. So when we look over time, despite having arguably the tightest labor market on record right now, folks getting out of prison are finding jobs at lower rates than they did in the 1990s, when a majority of people coming out of our prison system found work shortly after exiting. But this isn't a problem that's solely limited to justice-involved folks. When you look at the trend for all workers in our state with a high school education or less, their employment rates have been going down over the last several decades as well. Now, to put this into a bit more context, when you break out these trends by race, you see that all of the deterioration in outcomes over the past 2 decades for folks getting out of our prison system have been driven by white people. So Black folks, African American folks getting out of our prison system are employed at about the same rate as they were 20 years ago, and in inflation adjusting terms are earning about the same amount as they did 20 years ago. It is those white folks getting out of prison that are employed at much lower rates and earning much less than they did 20 years ago. So of course, conditions are very challenging for all people, men and women of all races, all ethnicities getting out of our prison system. But when you look at that deterioration in outcomes over time, this is tied in with the larger conversation about deteriorating employment prospects for the working class, and most acutely, the decline in the relative position of the white working class in our state and nationwide. We also have a major challenge with industry segregation. So the vast majority of people coming out of our prison system are employed in only a handful of sectors. Administrative and support services, these are temporary contract jobs, janitorial work, bars, restaurants, food manufacturing, slaughterhouses in particular, construction, jobs that tend to be on average either very low paying, very precarious without predictable work schedules, and or very dangerous. Not what we tend to think of as the higher paying, most rapidly growing so-called jobs of the future. And indeed, when you look at those jobs of the future, our professional services sector, our healthcare sector, our financial sector, certain well-compensated sales roles, you're not going to find a lot of justice-involved folks in those sectors. They tend to be employed at extraordinarily low rates in our higher-paying, larger, rapidly growing sectors. So in conclusion, we know that employers are desperate to find workers right now, and at least they're telling us that they might be willing to give folks that they might have overlooked in the past, including the justice involved, a so-called second chance. And we do know that over time, finding a good job after prison, or really for most folks in our society has gotten more difficult, but it's certainly not impossible. Some of the barriers to higher paying work, as I mentioned, might be due to the human capital, some of the individual attributes of job seekers, what they have on their resumes. A lot of folks getting out of prison might need additional work experience to climb that career ladder to higher paying supervisory work. They might need more industry specific skills, more education to obtain gainful employment. But the challenges are not all at the individual level. A lot of them are structural. They're due to changes in the economy over time. They're due to, frankly, somewhat arbitrary regulations that are on the books, licensing requirements, liability concerns, and to a large degree, social bias and cultural norms. This, combined with human capital, is what is keeping a lot of justice-involved folks out of the healthcare sector, IT roles, finance, professional services, the more higher paying sectors of our economy. But none of these are impossible barriers to overcome. These are all things that we can work together to try to get through. And I'm looking forward to our conversation as we talk through some of these issues. Thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to help set the stage for this conversation. If folks are interested in some of these data that I presented, these all come from the North Carolina Common Follow-up System, which is a repository of longitudinal data that we maintain in partnership with the State Department of Adult Corrections and other state agencies. When you go to our website, you can also read more about our research looking at the public safety benefits of helping folks find a good job after prison. Indeed, a paycheck can be a pathway out of prison for many justice-involved folks in our state. Thank you again for your time, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Very well done, Andrew. Thank you so much. Just as good as on February 13th in person. And we need to commend you as well and your partners, Jeff DeBellis, Jeff Rosenthal, Jamie Vaughn, on the LMI Tuesday sessions that you all have been doing. I think a lot of those presentations set what you've done today is give us some context. So I hope we're not infringing on your trademark or patent with a Talent First Tuesdays.
Thank you, Tom.
Now we're going to turn to our other panelists, and I think we're going to look at the recommendations as well, and then invite our panelists to comment. Jennifer, I see you pop up, and you were very, I think, effective back on the 13th of February in articulating the kinds of challenges that have risen that Andrew has put in context here with the quantitative data. But I think you've got some qualitative assessment to offer. So let me ask you, what are important, which of these recommendations and tactics are most important to you, and for what reason?
Yes, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you everyone here. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to the other panelists. We had an amazing conversation, and starting out with this one, which one is most important, it's really easy to say yes. You know, they are just all really interrelated, and they all are vitally important. So it's hard to choose one, but I know that I did. And as I refresh my memory on the challenges, public safety fears limit the opportunities for justice involved, and workforce reentry programs for the justice involved are under-resourced, and that's opportunity youth. We had 3, that was 1. Systems are difficult to navigate for the justice involved. And also thinking about the conversations that we had during the 4 task force meetings, because we are carrying the voices of the amazing group that was convened on this behalf, which was filled with folk who both justice involved and allies, as I like to call those of us who have not had the justice involved experience. I will say for myself, I think that the public safety fears limit opportunity for the justice involved would be my top. And a lot of that just has to do with my background, somebody who is interested in the whole, in holistic services, holistic approaches, that we can have all the policies in the world, right? It's the folkways versus versus the law. We can have all of the policies on the book, but if there's fear in the hearts of people, if there's misinformation in their minds, And particularly, we can see it with what's happening now across the country in terms of public safety fears and how that can so easily be co-opted into an extraction and an otherizing and a contraction into your own group and just heightened responses where they are not necessarily needed. I know all of us here have heard the stories. I mean, I even go back and I think, way back when one of the political campaigns, right, the Willie Horton or those sorts of things, right? When you read about those programs, the programs were so effective. The program that he was a part of was so effective. But the second the narrative got hooked, it could prey on people's worst fears about their own safety, fears that are absolutely not true. And I love Andrew's his data, and I know he has other data that show the truth about public safety. Public safety has not gone down overall in the ways that it is put out there. But again, I think that the narratives, I think that those fears, and they exist even when public safety isn't in the public consciousness. And so some of the things that we were talking about is making justice-involved work a public health issue. Like at the end of the day, when people hear, and I can speak more for women than I can for men, but it extrapolates across, all folk who are incarcerated. We're talking about folk who have lived through trauma before, during, and after incarceration. We're talking about folk who very often, particularly with women, have dealt with unimaginable traumas. We're talking about people who the overwhelming majority of whom have mental health and or substance use issues. People who could have benefited from treatment way early in their journeys that could have kept them from justice involvement in the first place. We're also talking about poverty. We're talking about pure economics, that poverty, we criminalize poverty in this country. And in so doing, the last resort for folk who are impoverished is the criminal. And I've been told criminal justice is really a misnomer. I'm trying to change my language to the criminal legal system, And so I'm going to stop talking, but I think it's so important because I think the more people who are educated and the more people, what's the term? Proximity breeds empathy, right? The more people who recognize that 25%, like 1 in 4 of the people we know in North Carolina have some kind of justice involvement, and you don't know who they are. And if we were all in a room together, you wouldn't know who was who. And just understanding, decoupling from the media and those narratives and getting to know people and their stories and their journeys can go far when things happen like what's happening, nationwide around public safety, because people know, okay, yeah, that's happening. That's not great. And I know that that's not the truth because I know this person, I know this person, I know what's happening. People can't get that hooked into those protective mechanisms that can be so damaging to our justice-involved brothers and sisters.
Those are terrific observations, Jennifer. Proximity breeds empathy. That's a great tagline, a great takeaway. And I think I heard you say at the outset, too, how important it is to capture the positive features and to market and promote those successes, because you will have those aberrations. You will have those exceptions that all too often are featured as examples of why the programs don't work. And it's not just not fair, it's not right, and it's not where we need to be. So somebody has to capture the positive benefits and beat the drum for how important that is for our market, which is out there in the population that you just described. That's great. Nathan, are you seeing the same thing from Jennifer's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Myself as a trauma survivor, it was extremely difficult just to be incarcerated for a long period of time, and to step out of those doors was very overwhelming. You get used to things being a certain way. And so I really feel like if we had more programs in the prisons, as well as follow along supports, that would really boost as far as people getting a sense of self and maybe gaining skills needed for the labor market.
they're doing a lot as preparatory work. And I think Andrew's commentary about looking at accumulating academic competencies, occupational skills, credentials, so you can be more competitive post-release. That's great. Right on. I've seen him joined by Philip. Your sense of the same topic, Philip?
Well, are you asking me about my recommendation? Because I got some 2 cents. I got 2 cents. I got 2 cents. We're gonna multiply it by 3,000. When I think of the recommendations, it's hard for me to narrow it down to one because there are 2 specific recommendations that kind of go hand in hand. And when we talk about, building capacity for those organizations that are serving the justice involved, I say one of the ways that I'm seeing is a way to build that capacity is by shifting from, it centering on the criminal legal system and a public safety issue to it being more of a public health issue. You see, because what I'm learning, especially like with partners like the Dogwood Health Trust, their focus is on the social determinants of health, and economic stability is one of them. But people can't retain a job if they don't have that social and community context determinant of health addressed. So that's where that building the capacity for those community-based organizations that are providing that mentoring, you see, that accountability. And I like that Nathan brought up the fact that we need to shift more towards like in-reaching an individual while they're currently incarcerated. You see, there's a level of assessing their needs and establishing rapport and even being hope. When you leverage lived experience and these people see people who are formerly incarcerated coming on the inside, that's a hope shot. And it all starts with hope. Once you give a person that's incarcerated some hope, the sky is the limit. And building the capacity of those community-based organizations is where it's going to have to start, because many of them, if they're handling business on the outside with a shoestring budget, they can't also be traveling to go inside the penitentiary. Like right now, there's a young lady on my team. She's going to be going to Raleigh on the 26th. On the 26th, it's coming in hot. She's going to be going to Raleigh for an event at the women's prison. And so when she's there, nobody's filling her spot while she's gone. You see? So if a female needed something while she was out of town, it's not something we can do. And so we have to focus on building that capacity and then going from there. And I'll say this, that book, Untapped Talent, man, oh my God, like they outline Jeffrey Korsnick. If y'all hadn't read that book, I challenge you to check it out. He talks about some best practices that are existing across the United States of America, and all of them are doing in-reach. All of them are doing accountability and what some call social services, some call soft skills training. I call them essential skills training. Ain't nothing soft about it,
So I was just going to go there, and that's a great untapped talent. What are we familiar with here within the state of North Carolina that would constitute a best practice? And I'd ask that of all the panelists.
Well, I mean, I can mention some programs, and I'm working on getting there. There's a program in Charlotte called CCT, the Center for Community Transitions, and I just came from doing jail ministry. You see, I still got my volunteer badge on. I just left the jail. And so one of the guys that was in there was talking about reentry resources, and he mentioned specifically CCT. And so CCT has a location embedded inside of like Goodwill, but they have a relationship with the Department of Adult Corrections, and they also have those connections on the outside with the resources. So resource navigation is another thing that came up at the task force, to where people in all work groups talked about how we have all the resources, but people still don't get to them. And that's why we need those resource navigators, hence building the capacity for those community-based organizations. But CCT is a model, I would say, as well as Frankie Roberts has one on the reentry side in Wilmington called Link. That's another great one that has the residential component, the workforce development component, the accountability and recovery and everything all in-house.
I'm always preaching about our program, the IPS model. That's individual placement and support. We've had a great success rate. The follow-along supports are crucial for our people living with recovery, mental health issues, and justice involved. You don't just get somebody a job, you follow along with them, see how you can help them out later in the week, later in the month, you check in on them. Great success with the IPS program.
So we've got good models in Charlotte, Wilmington, and this program is out in Nashville, Nathan?
I'm out in Waynesville.
In Waynesville, fantastic. And Jennifer, any examples that you could cite?
Yeah, well, I'm going to, as Nathan did, I'm going to cite our organization because we actually use CCT and Link as models as we were developing our women's reentry project. So my organization, Arise Collective, and it is based on, a nationwide recognition that co-located housing, because housing has to come first, right? You can have all the programs in the world, but if you think about Maslow, unless somebody knows that they have a safe place to rest their head, they are going to be cognitively incapable of moving up the ladder to the soft skills, the essential skills that we know are going to make the difference in their thriving in life as opposed to simply surviving. And so programs like ours, where we house women, we have primarily exclusively a peer support staffing. Those navigators, they come out of the prison, we take them shopping, they're queen for the day. They spend the next few weeks getting their identity established if they have not already been able to get their driver's licenses and the like. We're putting them through a boot camp so that some of those trauma embedded, some of those, just some of those trauma embedded proclivities, behaviors, attitudes, and the like, they can start de-stressing, re-regulating their nervous systems, getting a sense of who they are outside the prison, reuniting with their families if need be. But the base is that they have a safe place to live. They've got care coordinators. We have a community chaplain. Like, we basically wrap around the women in our program and meet every need while they are getting their feet and their legs under them. So then and we carry them from a money standpoint. We do not require for the first 3 months that they pay any kind of program fees because we want them to save, right? Part of this is also that they have legs to stand under themselves economically when they leave the program, when they're ready to leave the program. Getting a job, that is the next thing, after getting the job skills and the life skills. So all of that, all of those programs that he's talking about, they're really intensive. They have a very high ROI, but they haven't proved to be effective because they hit all the needs at once. Because that's the main thing about folk coming out. And I know, Nathan and Philip can speak to this. It's not like you've been out, we don't want homelessness anywhere, right? But after a point in time when you're outside, you're dealing with the issues. This month you dealt with this month you dealt with this month you dealt with that. Somebody stepping out of prison is dealing with anywhere from 6 to 18 things at the same time that they have to address. That's too much for anyone.
Do we need more navigators, Jennifer?
Say that again?
Do we need more navigators?
We need so many more navigators. And one of the things that our task force talked about is maybe using the LRCs, right? The local reentry councils around the state, perhaps as hubs for those. But some of our organizations have navigators. But yeah, there are resources out there. People can't connect those dots to be able to get them. And then there's also the ridiculousness of, if any of you have done a reentry simulation, you know what I'm talking about. If you have not done a reentry simulation, you need to do a reentry simulation if you're interested in this work, because it shows you go to get the job. Well, you can't get the job because you don't have the ID. So you try to get to the ID, but you don't have transportation there. In Raleigh, we know the realities of transportation. So without transportation to get there, you miss that appointment. Well, you miss that appointment. And if you have a parole officer who is not in a great mood that day, you might get a violation. There's just a million barriers that are in front of people. It really does take somebody who can understand in between the different agencies and the systems to walk someone through.
You have great passion, Jennifer. Are we moving in the right direction? I'll open that up too. Are we making progress? Andrew shared a lot of data. Are we at least moving in the right direction from your estimation, from your perspective? So,
well, I want to be careful with how I answer that question. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic. Since I would say since George Floyd was slain, more organizations and systems are starting to lean in willing to discuss racial disparities within systems. I feel like if we're really going to address the criminal legal system, we have to do it with a racial equity lens. And I'm hopeful. I know the Second Chance Lobby Day is coming up on May the 2nd. And one of the components we're advocating for is an increase in reentry budgets, which would in turn have more resources to fund those navigators that we speak of. But it's going to take lobbying. It's going to take educating politicians, because what's going on right now is not enough. And the racial disparities are blatant. Black men make up almost half the prison population. And the vast majority of them who are returning to the community don't have a work history. They don't have credentials, portable credentials, none of that. And so it's not the same way for their white friends, our white friends. I run reentry programs now with a very small budget. And the guys that get out, when white guys get out of prison, it's easy to get them a job. Like they got all kind of experience, operate heavy equipment and manufacturing and construction. Like it's not hard. And so I feel like if we're talking about workforce development for the reentry workforce, we have to do it with the racial equity lens. And right now, I'm not seeing those investments, but I am optimistic about us being specific when we're talking about addressing issues such as this.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And workforce development, that's come up a number of times. Are we integrated sufficiently with our 22 workforce development boards and our NC Works Commission? I'll throw that out. I know you've done a lot of great work with Annie Izod as the co-chair of the task force, Philip. So I open that up to the panel. Is there enough interaction amongst the workforce boards in this topic?
Well, I say it's getting there. Definitely, one of the outcomes I'd say, even with the relationship with Dr. Izod, they've rolled out more funding. Like since the task force began, there's been opportunities that came from the Department of Commerce and everything that mentioned specific reentry, and also it required partnerships with community-based organizations. And all of that was clear deliverables from what we've been doing with Talent First NC, because one of the first things that we found out from all the work groups was that, the resources can exist, but if we don't have the communication, collaboration, and solidarity with the community-based organizations, it'll still continue to miss people. And one thing that Anita Graham said at the Invested in Rural America conference, she was the keynote. She said, if the work that you're doing continues to leave the same people out, then what's the point? And so one thing I can say is the work that we're doing already has had some changes and funding opportunities that Dr. Izod was intentional about requiring, relationships with community-based organizations.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. That's great. We got a question from Gianna Cullinan. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. What kind of work skills development is happening in correctional institutions, and how transferable is the training work experience available? Anybody want to take a shot at that? It's a great question.
I mean, I can. I don't want to do all the talking, but so I go inside the prisons now. I do a ministry. I'm going to be actually at Rutherford Correctional all day on Saturday, so I'm very involved with the prisons. I feel like we can do better. The state can definitely do better with making sure that whatever's being offered on the inside is meeting the demands of the current needs of the workforce. And that's not happening right now. Though we have opportunities, though. I do also know that there's been some staffing issues inside the prisons, which does impact what types of programs you can bring in. Because if they're not fully staffed, then it limits what they can actually offer. But no, we're not meeting the needs of the workforce at this point in time, specifically talking about, advanced manufacturing, talking about portable credentials that one can get even in construction. But shout out to Cleveland Community College. They're doing some great work with their initiative with plumbing and electrical and HVAC. They're killing the game.
So that's a great model that's maybe worthy of emulation. Jennifer, where can people participate in that simulation, the reentry simulation you mentioned?
Yep. I am going to answer that, but I do want to piggyback on what Philip was saying, just in terms for the folk who are here who don't know in terms of the kinds of things that do exist and that have typically been offered. There is an institution in the state called Correctional Enterprises. Well, that's more like work and workforce. In terms of apprenticeships, things like matting and framing, serve safe cooking, those are some apprenticeships that folk can get. I think on the men's side, it is things like HVAC and construction. So those are the typical, and there are community colleges that are the ones, like Philip gave a shout out to Cleveland community. I think Wake Tech in our area at one point before COVID was, they were talking about a CDL training, you know, those sorts of things. So I think definitely the relationships that community colleges have with prisons might be one of those best ways to get folk in. In terms of the simulations, there are a few organizations around the state that offer them. The BJA, somebody from BJA, I believe, is the one that does them for the reentry conferences. So they just put them on back to back. They offer about 4 at a time. Our organization has been offering them since 2016. We do 2 to 3 a year. We respond to invitations from groups. You need to have a group of 40 people. We can only do so many a year because we do them for free. And, you know, like Philip said, it pulls us from our core work, but we find it so absolutely vital because at the end of a simulation, folk get it. And, you know, the higher the gatekeeper, the higher the influence someone has, the more we want them to be around the simulation table, because to the extent that it can approximate the frustration, that's the main thing you get, just the real visceral understanding that, okay, this really is hard. I can't believe I got sent back to jail 2 times, right? It's that kind of experience. So you can reach out to us. Duke just recently had one. Our Journey recently, sponsored the one with Duke. So if you reach out to those organizations that are doing reentry work, more often than not, we are going to have access to simulations. But again, we're going to do another one. We did one in April for the Wake County LRC. So that was just a week or so ago. We're going to do another one in the fall, I think, in Western North Carolina. But we're open. If you have a request and you've got a group of 40 or so folk, let us know. We'll come out and do it if we can.
That'd be great, Jennifer. And also thanks for emphasizing apprenticeships with our community college system and apprenticeship program, pre-apprenticeships. That could be a really good solution, especially for pre-release. Troletta Banks has a question. Troletta.
Hey, good morning. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, in Mecklenburg County. I heard you ask the question. I was trying to be quiet, but about was the workforce development boards moving in the right direction when it comes? Sorry, we just got a alert, Amber Alert. Sorry, it was an Amber Alert. I'm on my phone. I apologize. But you asked the question, was the workforce development boards moving in the right direction? For Mecklenburg County, I think they still need a little bit of work. They're trying to move in the right direction, but I really feel like it should be a straight funding for a pot of funding for people who are formerly incarcerated, led by people with lived experience, so that there's equitable access to that funding for those individuals who want to engage with the workforce development board here. Right now, I know that Mecklenburg County only has one career advisor that's geared towards reentry. So I think that if there were some allocated funds just for formerly incarcerated individuals that want to engage with the workforce development board here in Mecklenburg County, I think that would be great.
Thanks, Troletta, and you're leading us into the open discussion amongst our participants. So I'm sorry I started a couple of minutes early, so I wanted to get that hand. I see Phil Prescott here from the Eastern Workforce Development Board. Phil was a member of the inaugural North Carolina Workforce Development Leadership Initiative, which was a 60-hour class. Thanks to Sarah, we had an EDA grant. And constituent services was a topic intermittently throughout the entire duration of that training. So more exposure like this, I think, and these excellent suggestions about trying to partner with other institutional assets and resources is critically important. So at this juncture, I think we're going to have to turn it back to Sarah, but thank you all very much for this really substantive, thoughtful input. There's a lot of takeaways here today. So thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you all. It's it was so great to be back in person at the forum, but I forget the benefits sometimes of doing it virtual and the robust discussion in the chat, which I've enjoyed just as much as well. So, a couple of things, just some closing remarks. Jennifer, I love how you said moving beyond surviving to thriving, and not to oversimplify it, but I'm sort of hearing this like 3-legged stool of, the in-reaching and the wraparound services, thinking about the social determinants of help, of health, the job skills training itself and when that takes place, and then just changing this narrative. And then of course there's a lot of prevention. So again, not to oversimplify, but those are some of what I heard. It's interesting, Jennifer, too, because of language. We've been using the term justice involved, and then to hear you use the term criminal legal system, it makes me think, is there a different term that we should be using for justice involved as well? So, I don't know, that just came up for me as well. So once again, I just want to thank our guest today, Tom White with NC State for moderating, Andrew Berger-Gross with NC Lead at Commerce for providing us with data. We do have some other really great data that was shared from some students here at NC State on employment data that I think you'll find interesting. Jennifer Jackson with the Arise Collective, Nathan Cartwright out in Henderson or in Waynesville, and then of course IEI practitioner and residence Philip Cooper. Thank you all for doing this double duty of not just presenting at the forum, but then due to popular demand coming back and doing this as well. The recorded portion of today's conversation will be available later today as a special episode of our Connector podcast series. We will also share it on our YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn platforms, and these links can be found on our website at emergingissues.org. Join us on May 9th for the next in our series, where we'll talk about military veterans and their families. And you can learn a lot more about the series and register for all of the Talent First Tuesdays on our website as well, shared on your screen. So for more information, emergingissues.org. And thank you again. Until next time, stay connected.